GM friends, and welcome to the future of gaming. You're listening to our weekly blockchain gaming rollup, and we are recording this on the 22nd of July. We have Philip Collins, Devin Becker, myself, Nico Vereecke, and then we have Jasper Dansercoer, who is the lesser known but equally important fourth founding nerd of the FOGDAO. Jasper, welcome, sir.
Correct, thank you. I'm glad to finally be surrounded by super smart people.
Finally be surrounded by super smart people.
I think
that really sounds like
someone else.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about yourself. Like, what are you up to?
Well, I've always been a Web2 developer for most of my life until Nico actually red-pilled me into the whole Web3 scene. He convinced me to build my own crypto game as well, which I started at the beginning of this year. It's on a lower level right now because I joined Footium as a developer, which is a football manager with powered by NFTs. You should definitely check it out. But I'm super excited to really be talking about the future of gaming, being a gamer for all my life.
It's funny now you have to say Web 2 developer, whereas before you could just say you were a game developer. Now you suddenly have to relabel your entire history.
I know that was an interesting conversation that was happening in the Discord recently about what's the friendliest or most reasonable way to differentiate the Web 2 versus Web 3. Nico, you made some good points about web not even being that relevant in the first place, and so more maybe like centralized and decentralized. But this distinction is weird.
Right.
And I feel like sometimes it just sounds like it's like undermining the other group unintentionally. So we're gonna have to find something sustainable for that.
This is why we need to work on this taxonomy, man. I'm saying, like, too many people are using different words to say similar things, or the same words to say different things. So anyway, but anyway, I was also thinking that, like, we're always using this word Web3, and Web3 means so many things, and it's like it's a new internet, and then some games are like literally just like using like the blockchain to do cool stuff, and at that point they're like feel like they're more blockchain games rather than Web3 games, and so yeah, there's some work will need to be done.
I'll just say whatever's trending, man. That's all I care about.
Yeah,
I just got to get the keyword
like
SEO in there.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so what are we talking about today? So I have a few updates, some on the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of technology that I was exposed to, and I can share a bit more about that. We're talking about a discussion we've been having, a poll that I made on the socials, which is, would old school MMOs work as well or better with blockchain or not? That's going to be an interesting debate. And then we talk about Minecraft saying no to NFTs. We talked about the Otherside, so that's the Bored Ape Yacht Club metaverse, and then there's other news, Square Enix, Disney, and we'll see where we get, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about this week. So first update from my side. So first of all, I had some people concerned about me because I sounded rough last episode, and the reason I sounded rough is just because I wake up really early for this, and I've been traveling a lot, and anyway, it's just my voice. I'm fine. I'm very happy. I'm very excited to do this and having a blast. So thanks for your concern. Noted, but I'm good.
That's why he's wearing no sleeves today. Show it off.
Dude, it's really hot. So I was in France during the hottest day in France ever. Yes, that was spicy. It was like 41 degrees in Paris. It was fun. I mean, I had like this layer of sweat the whole day, and had to stay hydrated. Kept that in mind. All good. Anyway, so what are we talking about? So last weekend I was part of a judging panel of a hackathon organized by MatchBoxDAO. And so MatchBoxDAO is a DAO dedicated to gaming for, StarkNet. And so StarkNet is the ZK rollup. So it's a layer 2 ZK rollup on Ethereum, built by StarkNet, who also built StarkX. Man, this is getting complicated. Which is being used by by Immutable and by Sorare, which they use to actually have tiny gas fees. So it's a very efficient scaling solution to have NFTs. And so they're building their own blockchain, which is very fast, very scalable. And I was part of the judging panel of a hackathon that they did, where it was like, look, this blockchain, this technology is coming. Here, you're a bunch of nerds, build some cool shit for games, and then I was judging the cool shit that they built. And so what's interesting about ZK rollups and StarkNet in specific is that it does three things. I thought it did two things, and I learned that it does three things. One is ZK rollups make for more scale. So some of these solutions basically like reimagined like Web2 solutions, and that couldn't be done on ETH layer 1 or even on Polygon, but they would work on ETH layer 2. And so, for example, one of the projects actually rebuilt the sandbox, which is like a big open space where you can put blocks. They rebuilt that, but fully on chain. So the sandbox, the only way it uses Web3 is like to keep track of who owns what land, and then you can do some stuff with NFTs as well. But in this world, I forgot the name actually, but they're literally like you put the block, and that block is actually recorded on the blockchain. So that was pretty cool. But the second thing that these ZK rollups do is using ZK tooling. And so for me, this was the most interesting part. Basically, a team built Texas Hold'em, which is like a poker variant, on chain. So you can literally, like you're playing a poker game, and so you know your cards, but you can't know someone else's cards who actually exist on the blockchain. And so this for me, this is crazy, right? This is using this ZK tooling. ZK stands for zero knowledge, and it's like a way to prove something without actually showing the information. It's very complex, but it's mind-blowing. And in any case, so the fact that we're now building poker on-chain has, for me at least, serious implications for what games we can actually build on-chain. And I don't know, I found that like amazing, really cool. I don't think, poker on-chain is going to be a big deal, as in like in the use case itself. But I do believe that this, like the way it's done and that technology will be used to build some really cool stuff. Any thoughts?
Am I the only one who hears StarkNet and assumes it's Iron Man's roll-up system? Just had to get that out of the way.
They're like way ahead. They were way ahead of, like they're 9 months ahead when it comes to this tooling.
Seems appropriate then.
Bunch of smart Israelis, man.
Yeah, definitely. I think we talked about this stuff a little bit last time, but I do think that tech is one that people are kind of considering like the next level for now till we come up with something better. I do wonder about the whole like on-chain part that you're talking about, because like my understanding was part of what that can do is that like maybe the code's on-chain, but maybe some of the data isn't. And you're proving it, like you're doing some stuff off chain and then proving it onto the chain using the zero knowledge math. And so like maybe the cards themselves aren't actually on the chain, but they are like you could prove that the player didn't cheat, essentially, that they didn't modify their cards, that they played correctly. And so like I haven't built anything on ZK rollup, so I don't necessarily know exactly how that works. Like I've done Solidity stuff, but I don't. In fact, I need to do like a hackathon or something. Because I used to do a lot of those, like hackathons and game jams, and that's a great way to like really roll up your sleeves and get to know a technology, because you have like 24, 48 hours of just pure focus and a few hours sleep to really do it. And I think that's a great way to get to know this stuff. So I hope they hold a lot more of those, whether you're judging them or not. But if you're judging them, I'll make sure to do those ones in case you're biased to give me, higher score. But yeah, that's what I wonder is like the on-chain versus off-chain part with that gets a little bit mysterious. I feel like you take something like Gods Unchained, and I feel like most of the game doesn't happen on-chain, right? But like there's enough proof on-chain, and it's like when Splinterlands started moving some stuff off-chain, like they just tried to keep the stuff on-chain that was like necessary to like validate things, right? To focus on proof and fairness and all that stuff. And like obviously ZK rollups seem like they make that easier to do and stuff like that. So when you're talking about like, you're putting all the blocks on chain and stuff in that sandbox kind of world, the Minecraft kind of world, whatever you want to call it, voxel world, it makes me wonder like what part of the data is on chain or not, and like is it just validating that you made a valid block placement? Is it actually storing the block placement? Because one thing we always talk about too is storage space is a big deal, and I don't think ZK rollups solve the storage space problem necessarily. Like they make transactions more efficient, I think, but they don't necessarily like solve for storage. And I don't know if anyone's really solving for storage yet. I know that like Polygon's trying to do stuff that like spreads out data availability layers and other things like that are a little bit above my current level of understanding of a lot of that space. But I know there's people looking at different ways of treating it. And Flow, for example, too, has like 3 different types of validators for like data and transactions and all that stuff. So I know there's people like trying to break apart some of those pieces. And I'm kind of curious where we end up landing on a lot of that stuff. Because I know you're very like, let's put a lot of stuff on chain. But the reality often is like, well, we can only scale that to some extent. But maybe there's another data kind of compression thing that comes along that makes storage really efficient or whatever.
Yeah. I think it feels like we're moving towards a world where we will have purpose-specific, like decentralized chains, where one chain actually does like a lot of computing. One chain is used as a sort of storage layer. Maybe one chain is like used to actually like run decentralized game servers, where like it doesn't like a Call of Duty match, for example. It's a bad example because that's going to be probably the latest thing that will ever be decentralized, right? But where there's one chain that actually stores that holds the server, and so yeah, I'm over my skis here, right? I'm not technical enough to understand exactly what's being done, but seeing the results makes things interesting for me. At least it's like why I get excited about the poker on chain is like for me. I know maybe this is just me, right? But if I'm playing a online poker game, I'm always nervous, or I'm never sure that the game, the company that hosts the game, is actually being fair in like distributing cards and having RNG inside the game. And so I guess having it on chain actually just makes it provable or like verifiable that there is actually like true randomness and it cannot be abused by other players.
I don't know if you remember the early Bitcoin stuff doing that too. There was a ton of Bitcoin gambling stuff back in like 2013 and stuff like that was online that always had that concept of provable fairness was like a big deal with the early like crypto gambling. And that's an interesting concept because you don't have that concept outside of like crypto usually. Like people don't focus on that because they don't have like the cryptographic proof systems that we have. And that's like a big part of it because it's also because of the immutable history part, right? The fact that you can't change history is what makes provably fair a doable thing. And that's basically an effect of the way the blockchain works. And so it's interesting that in itself is like a new kind of technology towards gaming that didn't really exist before, whether that be gambling or just provably fair random in let's say it is Call of Duty and like your bullets have some random spread. You could in theory like prove the randomness was fair in that, right? Like, but you're right, like trust of game companies it underlies a lot of the ideas of decentralization and smart contracts being public, and a lot of the things we build is about technology based trust, and I think provable randomness and stuff like that is definitely a big part of that.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting part of the conversation too, where when we talk about what's new with blockchain in games is the non-financial benefits that you get through proving actions and proof of achievement and proof of fairness in certain games. And I think poker is a great example of that. I remember talking to the Decentral Game team about this, where they were putting up a consistently updating audit of what was happening. And so you could see law of large numbers that the house odds were actually what was happening in game. It wasn't just a posted number that was, different from what was actually being seen by players. And, it's kind of a low lift just to have that be a constantly running and available audit that players can see.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that will make people stop playing games like roulette, which has like a net negative expected return.
Don't underestimate people's ability to delude themselves when it comes to money.
Oh man, it's one of the things like I never enjoyed going to a casino and like knowing that you're just gonna.
I recently won 100 euros at a casino, so I'm happy.
Anyway, nice.
I love that people that talk about their wins never talk about their losses. So it's like, oh, I lost.
It was like the only time I went,
but
so
I won 100 this time.
I'm up.
If you stop now and never go again, then you're a winner for life. But if you go back, you'll probably lose more.
There was this, and this is completely unrelated to games. I'm sorry for this, but I think it was in Freakonomics. They talked about how most gamblers talk about the lucky first week, where gamblers like have a lot of early wins, and so they were talking about that. It's not that everyone gets a lucky first week, but it's people that get a lucky first week that they go
survivorship bias kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. I always talk that about casinos. Like casinos could make so much more money if they could read that your player card is new and give you a couple early big wins, and they'd easily make that money back. They just legally can't do that. But if they legally could, they absolutely would, because it would make them so much money. Because there's actually a thing in the way dopamine works in your brain. When you get a heavy dopamine effect, it takes actually a lot more times of that not happening to diminish the dopamine. It takes a long time to undo, basically. But that's also what keeps us persistent in tasks, in trying to get that reward again. Because if we just went back the other way automatically, like then you would give up on things way too fast, right? And so like that actually works against the gambler, but that's an actual neurochemical effect that is meant to help us adapt in life.
So that's how RuneScape works, actually.
Gamblers.
I'm so happy with my big drop, and I'm more than happy to spend another 100 hours for the next drop.
I think gacha games do that. I think they purposely drop you like 5-star stuff early on because they can't legally, because it's not true gambling.
Dude, the whole world essentially is trying to hack our reward systems, like social media.
Why do you think I'm in games, man?
Gambling,
that's what I want to do.
Alcohol, food. Yeah. Anyway, that's another that's a philosophical discussion for another podcast. Let's move on. So yeah. Oh, by the way, I was saying 3 things, cool things using StarkNet. So one is scaling, second is ZK tooling, and the third one is account abstraction, which has big implications, but I have no idea. Well, I have a bit of an idea what it means, but I'm gonna have to have someone smarter than myself on.
Yeah, I'm writing that down.
This. So actually, like, I can actually like get some of the Starkware founders on, and so maybe we can talk about what StarkNet and Starkware can do for games specifically, and have a conversation about that, and like get back to basics, right? Like how does this work, and where do
But so you were the judge, right?
So that's something we can do for sure. All right.
Which were like the most interesting projects and why?
So there were a bunch, but there were a lot of like tools that already existed on other chains, didn't exist yet on StarkNet, that were being replicated. And so for me, there's a lot of them actually only used the fact that you could scale way more on StarkNet because transactions are cheaper, and so that's why I think I made the 3 different points. And so for me, I was most interested in the projects that used both the ZK tooling and the scaling part. And so for me, I think it was hard to assess because like I'm not technical. Like I could run the code and look at the code itself, but I didn't do that because I had smarter judges who were doing that. And so it's hard for me to like really assess how well their code was written and stuff. Anyway, and so they, I don't even remember who exactly won, but it was a good one. But these were the ones that like sparked ideas in my mind. Like these early tools are not going to be what changes everything, but just the fact that some of these can exist means that you can actually build some really cool games on there. If that makes sense. All right, next, the debate. Would old school MMOs work as well or better with Web3? So the idea is, okay, you have very famous MMOs. The ones I use as an example usually are World of Warcraft and RuneScape, because I didn't play World of Warcraft, but I have a lot of friends who did, and I played a lot of RuneScape.
Still do, by the way.
Jasper did as well. And we never played together. Shame. Still do. There we go. Respect. And so the question is, okay, what if these games? So I've noticed, by the way, that 75% of the people that I meet in Web3 gaming used to play one of those games for some reason, like either World of Warcraft or RuneScape. Anyway, so what if you took those games, exact same game, but the assets, instead of living on the Blizzard or Jagex servers, they would live on chain, right? So all the assets are fungible or non-fungible.
Very important question, though.
That's a question.
Are you allowed, in this hypothetical, can anything about the game change to support that, or is it literally just that change? Because that totally changes things.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe Jasper, you have strong opinions on this.
Yeah. The thing is, because we were having a discussion in Discord about the topic as well, and I said that I don't believe in the current gaming wave being super financialized. And then you kind of blindsided me and said, okay, well, what about RuneScape? And RuneScape has always been my biggest passion when it comes to, okay, this is something that could really work with an open economy, because it kind of actually does in the black market way. But I do feel if we were to open it up, it would still really work just as much as it does now. Just make it for players to have like an extra incentive in there as well, a legal incentive, let's put it that way. But I'm more interested in why you think that wouldn't work, because it's like, for me, it's like the most obvious example of an open economy that would benefit the players.
That's fair. So I'll give you my thoughts. I think one something that I disagree on with a lot of people is they say, oh, hey, RuneScape and Warcraft and other of these MMOs have gray markets, so their games are actually already open. And I think that these gray markets prove enough of a friction to make these games not truly open, if that makes sense. So it's too hard to convert the items or the gold into real money. There is a bridge, but there's so much friction that it's not widely known, not everyone uses it, etc. And so I think the reason why my general thesis is that any game that existed up until Web3 would not work with Web3 or with all the assets living on chain. And the reason is that they're not designed that way. And I think one of the best examples of that is the Diablo 3 real money auction house, where they had the game Diablo 3, where you could trade between players, and then suddenly they introduced a real money auction house where you could actually trade these items and buy them with real money. And that actually completely ruined the game, because the game was about grinding for gear, to do harder quests to get better gear. So that's like the gameplay loop, and you could just shortcut it. Like you pay, let's say $50 for a game, and then you could pay $5 for the best gear. And buying that best gear is what you want. That's a goal, but it's actually also the grinding itself is the gameplay, and so it essentially ruined the game. And they removed it after 2-3 weeks or something, pretty fast. And so the reason I think why it wouldn't work for RuneScape and these games either is because let's say you're a new player, you drop into Lumbridge, which is the starting place, and you have 3 first quests that you can do, and these first quests, they reward you with 100 GP, 100 gold pieces, right? And the moment you do those quests, you get 100 gold pieces, and you're like, oh, what the fuck, I'm rich, I'm gonna buy 5 iron freaking swords, and I'm gonna be strong. But imagine it's an open economy, so you drop into Lumbridge, and the first guy, which is just a player, it's someone else, is there, and he's like, oh, here, I'll sell you 100,000 GP for 50 cents. Right? So you have the option. Either you're going to do a quest, it's going to take you a while, and you're going to get 100 GP, or a top level grinder who's level 99 or level 121 or something, is going to sell you 1,000 times the amount you would get for your initial quest, which you could do for the first 10 hours in the game. You're only going to make 10,000 GP to the max, and they'll sell you 100,000, so 10 times that amount for $50, because it doesn't take them any time to make. And so I think that will essentially kill the fun for new players, and it will essentially...
I'll disagree on that directly, because what you actually are saying about a player being spoiled from the beginning actually happened with Soulja Boy. He started playing old school RuneScape, I think, 2 years ago. And of course, his world was flooded. People were just giving his money left and right. But he was still enjoying the game to the maximum, because, okay, you have all the stats, but there's still a lot of fun in just the grinding and the levels. You still need to acquire the levels. You cannot buy the levels. If we were to go the real RuneScape 3 open economy way, where there's all these microtransactions for experience as well, then you're in big trouble, I think. And I think the time investment that's required to reach the later stages is still there.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. So you're saying is you have assets, but you also have skills, and so you need the time investment for the skills, even if you can.
Yeah, not only the
investment for the assets, because you just pay for it.
And I don't know if RuneScape counts as that, but there's a lot of games that lock you based off levels too on gear and stuff like that.
Yeah, I understand. What I'm saying is that I think that if locking players with levels, you need to grind to use the item, so you can't just skip in 1 second from level 1 to the end game, right? I think I guess my point is I think RuneScape would be less fun, right? Because it was designed in such a way that you needed both time, you needed to be efficient in skilling up your stats, and you need to be efficient in your economics, if that makes sense. And so the moment you take away that need to be efficient with economics, and you could just spend real money to skip that, I think you're going to make the game less fun and less successful, because just that's not how it was designed. So I guess what I'm saying is that if RuneScape, and that's I guess the point that Devin, that you asked, the clarification that you asked. For me, I think a game like RuneScape would work well, but I think that the game design would have to change dramatically or quite dramatically in order to make it so like there has to be like this economic layer, like, or it has to be tweaked, and I don't think it would work in the exact same way that the.
I'll let Devin go first.
That's kind of a big caveat. Yeah, that's like such a big rule to say nothing can change. I think that kind of already sets the question up before really like being opening to like be debated. But at the same time, like there are like, so part of the problem is that there's an assumption there made as well, right? So one of the assumptions is that if they're NFTs, then people are able then to trade them for money, essentially, right? And that in itself, I think, is part of the problem. Not necessarily like that NFTs are tradable or that they could be out of it, is that they're traded for money instead of barter. So I didn't play World of Warcraft or RuneScape. I actually started trying to play RuneScape recently just because I'm sick of people referencing it and I don't know it as well. Like I was very familiar with World of Warcraft in a lot of ways from studies and books and things like that, but I didn't want to poop sock my life away playing those games. So I'm just more familiar with them. I did play a bit of like Ultima Online, but mostly on shards. But my touch point is more Diablo, and I spent like 3-4 weeks like heavily studying Diablo 2 and the Diablo 3 real money auction house problem and the gray markets and stuff like that to really understand the takeaways for Web3. And there's a lot of nuance lost in the discussions over the real money auction house, for example, because people just kind of jumped to the conclusion that everyone else jumped to, which is that it short-circuited the gameplay, and therefore that's why it wasn't good. And there was a lot of other reasons why it failed, and part of one of those is the financialization as opposed to the trade. Trading's always been part of Diablo, but one of the things I learned in looking at it, talking to a lot of hardcore Diablo 2 players and stuff about what they didn't like specifically about it, trade, like barter trade, is actually very fun to Diablo players in general, right? Like it's generalizing, of course, but it's trading for straight money that devalues the entire experience in itself. And the part of the problem is because it's a flat auction house with no spatialness, no locality, it's just there or it's not. Like it becomes race to the bottom, and so there's no like differentiation. It's just whichever's the cheapest one you buy. And therefore it becomes race to the bottom, whereas barter is much, much more sophisticated than that and much more interesting and more social. And I think that's a big crux that people are ignoring, is when you trade for money. And that's why I try to encourage people, like, if you're going to do trading, trade like for like kind of things, like trade NFTs for NFTs. And it actually really kind of annoys the crap out of me that there's no OpenSea that's built on barter. Like Steam Marketplace, like on Steam, yeah, you can sell stuff on the marketplace, but Steam has barter trade built in. Like that as one of its main things. You can trade like for like with people just like you could in Diablo. And the de-emphasis on that's the thing that to me would make it fail, is like maybe you don't modify anything about the game, but you allow people to trade NFTs for NFTs off the game. I think it's still fine, like you could in the game. It's just the trading for money, that in my opinion is what tends to ruin it. And even auction houses in general can just be kind of crappy like that if there's no interestingness to them, no locality. Like Eve is a better example, right? Where markets have different places and different like time to them. Things come and go. There's routes, there's pirates. There's a huge amount of dimensionality to that trade that doesn't exist in just a flat global auction house. And I think that's where I would go with that argument. But if you're saying nothing could change at all and they can just trade straight for money, then I'm going to agree. It's not going to work great. But I also do have to disagree that not every player plays the same. In the situation where it's flooded with money and stuff like that, I'd still have fun because I don't care about the grinding part. So like I'm a different type of player, and there are different types of players. And for those of you that aren't familiar with like Bartle types and that idea, like there's that whole breakup of like the 4 different player types and stuff. And so depending on the player type you are, it would affect you differently.
I'll just double click on that first, because what Devin just said about multiple player types is super relevant, especially when we're looking at old school RuneScape, because you have like the open closed economy where you can trade between players with the golden pieces, but there is also extra game modes like Iron Man that restrict players from trading anything at all, and there are a lot of players that also enjoy that part of the game. So I think just the same with mobile games, some people are just whales. They like spending a lot of money, and some people just like the grind and like having the achievement as well. So I don't think that it will make everyone splash money all of a sudden and really ruin the game for everyone in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of talking about success too, I feel like what made some of these games so great was the game itself, the core loop, people got addicted to it, right? It wasn't just about the trading. It wasn't just about the financialization of it. It was, people get sucked into RuneScape because it is grindy and people love that grind. The core loop of World of Warcraft keeps people back for years and decades. And I think something that's interesting about this conversation is the fact that I almost just wonder if for a lot of these old MMOs, it's a matter of like, does it matter? If these games are able to succeed off chain, they built their game without Web3 even in their minds back at that time. And I think in order to make the most out of Web3, they probably would have had to go kind of back to the drawing board and really design the game around new compelling ways to do that. So I feel like the iteration of a lot of these games we're talking about with on-chain features would have to take a different direction, even from like a game design perspective and a player experience perspective, that is a totally different experience than what they came up with without blockchain in mind. And so I feel like it's hard to even compare the two, because I almost feel like it would be an entirely different player experience, not just a entirely different
there is one kind of way to sort of prove this, which is if you go back to the Ultima Online as the example, because it was one of the proto MMOs. The players could play on shards. That's what I played on. So the idea was players came up with server code so they could run their own servers, right? Something that you generally can't do with MMOs now. And so those players running their own servers could do whatever they want. So you could just cheat, have all the money in the world, have whatever, but the rules of the world still basically work the same. You could just change what they did, but the default was still running as vanilla Ultima Online. So there was players who could quote unquote ruin the games for themselves and stuff like that. And a lot of people had a lot of fun on shards by playing the game differently than it was intended. And obviously, yeah, like the part of I think Nico's argument too is that like everyone's playing in one server. And so like it maybe gets ruined for some people and maybe not others, but it's like it's one. You don't really have a choice. Whereas like in a situation with like shards, there can be a choice. You can go to the shard that's got like, whatever. Or like the way that people play with like mods in GTA, like 5, right? Where people are just crazy hacking or not. Or I think like this is more of a spectrum, and it's like we can all be kind of right in a specific context and wrong in another in this argument, I think. And that's what's interesting, is to explore the different ways it could be right or wrong. And I think like the Ultima Online shards was like an interesting historical example in like way before World of Warcraft and stuff. But you just can't do that now, unfortunately.
Yeah, the bunch of interesting stuff that I want to respond to. I think why I think this conversation is important, particularly for me and perhaps for Philip as well, is that the games that we look at that are being built now with Web3 in mind. I think my argument would be that I don't believe, and this is me personally, right? I have team members who might think otherwise. I think that if you come to me, you're building a Web3 based MMO, I need to see that you've thought about this problem, like what we've been discussing very strongly. Where my current thinking, and it's going to be hard. I believe strongly that whatever can be financialized and gained for money will be financialized and gained for money. On the Metacast last week, or actually this week, I recorded an episode. It's going to come out next week with a company called BreederDAO. And so they're actually like, they've optimized breeding of axes and other like breedable NFTs to make money. And so, this is like, if you open up any MMO, like you will have companies like gold farming 100%, right? And so, I think, value of some items will plummet, as you said. Anyway, and so the reason I think this is important is that, like, I want people to really think about that and take that into account. Like, okay, what if companies are going to, like, their business model is going to be to game your economy, right? What does that mean for your game and how are you handling that? Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that that's one reason why I think this conversation is important. And then the second point I wanted to touch upon with you, Devin, is you're saying that, so I used to play RuneScape, and so the first years I played RuneScape, I was a very low-level player, but I was fucking rich, because my thing, what I was doing is I was like basically arbitraging between different servers. So I was like a merchant. And at some point, they introduced the auction house, like the global auction house, where you could go and you could, it's almost like an automated market maker, but in the game for items within the game. And so that actually like ruined my playstyle because that existed. And so the conclusion I draw from that is, and because the thing is, like, I couldn't do any barter anymore because everyone was always using the automated, because it was way easier, right? You always had like a bid and an ask for any item you wanted to buy or sell. And so the moment you make an economy open, the moment you turn items into either fungible or non-fungible tokens, you give the possibility for an auction house to exist, for an AMM to exist, and because it exists, it will only one will be used. So you won't be able to restrict you won't be able to force players to barter. That's actually my point. In the game, you can force players to barter. Once you open it up, you won't be able to force them to barter, and they will never barter because it's always easier to either buy or sell, and no one's going to do the bartering. And that's also why no NFT barter marketplaces exist. It's because it's so hard and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And this is exactly my conclusion, right? Things like bartering cannot exist in an open economy. And so I think, this is one small conclusion, but I think we can pull that through to a bunch of other things. I think, the economic loop within RuneScape was very fun. And my strong belief is that that will be ruined the moment that, companies can make a business out of, gaming it.
One of the potential problems, I think, when we talk about the barter versus, traditional open economy, I think a bartering system is more conducive to the longevity of a single game title or a single game ecosystem, where you're trading for the sake of improving your game experience and advancing yourself within this game world. As soon as you make it open and you can start to extract value out, I think that's something we've seen with a lot of guilds, where the number one risk was always people are going to hop around to wherever the money is there to be made. And so if you're able to go in, grind, and extract value, I think the type of player that's doing that is probably more inclined towards the extraction angle. And so I think bartering is more of that player-centric, game-centric, and sustainable ecosystem than being able to just buy, sell, and trade, take out value, move it to the next game, buy, sell, trade.
Well, addressing what both of you were saying, like my biggest conclusion from doing a lot of that study was that in real world economics, we strive for efficiency of markets, right? That's the big thing. In games, it should be the opposite. The more efficient a market is, going to what you were saying, Nico, and kind of what you were saying, Phil, as well, the more efficient it is, the less fun it actually is. Because efficiency in games actually devalues everything, because everything is voluntary obstacles. That's what games are. They're just a series of obstacles you opt into. So the more obstacles you remove, like if you just press A to win, obviously that is no fun anymore, right? So the same goes for market stuff, right? The more obstacles in the market that are play aroundable, the more play space you're generating and the more fun you can have. And that's what I meant by like Eve's stuff. Like there's still an open economy, right? But the thing is, the open economy is also fraught with a whole bunch of inefficiencies. And that's what's fun about it, is being an arbitrager like you are, but in space with pirates and other things you have to deal with, right? You can still try to be efficient. Mm-hmm. But part of the point of what you said about like Breeder DAO and these other kind of things comes into play, which is if you set up an inefficient market, but businesses can come in and I don't know how to say it, make it overly efficient. They solve for the inefficiency problem. That's a problem. Like what you were saying, Phil, once people do that, it's kind of hard to go backwards, right? It's hard to go back to barter if people have already made it straight for currency. And like Diablo is an interesting one because it's a gray market, a semi-open economy that's been open for over 20 years and is still open to this day with Resurrected. Like there's still the same marketplaces, because when I looked into them, like they just pivoted to also now supporting Resurrected. So that marketplace has survived over 20 years, and it's not just selling things and trading things. There's services, people doing power leveling and speed running and all these other services as well that they sell through these forums and things like that. And that's still driving like a level of efficiency. But to your point, Nico, like part of what keeps those like from breaking the game is they're still a little bit difficult to do. They're against the terms of service, or they're like there's friction involved, as you mentioned. And I think that again just goes to the point of like, if you can keep it inefficient enough to be fun, then it doesn't break it. But as soon as it gets too efficient or someone comes in and solves it, yeah, I agree. Like it starts to become problematic. And that's why I agree with like the point of like, if you can't change the game at all and people can just NFT things and then they just go in the open market and people can build around it and solve everything, then yeah, I agree. It does end up sucking.
You made my case for me and very well said as well.
But if the market is actually solved, won't that bring the game to like a good equilibrium between players who want to invest money into it and players who want to extract money from it? Because I, for example, wouldn't mind paying, not really in this case maybe, but paying some money to just enjoy the end game faster, because I'm currently a dad as well. I don't have that much time. I just want to enjoy the game with my friends who might have more time to grind. I just want to reach the end game faster and do the raids with them as well. And if it's an open economy, won't that make be actually better for me having it at a lower price than if it was unsolved or something like that? Or am I understand?
Sure, but it skews the whole economy. That's the problem. Is it doesn't just affect you. As soon as that becomes an efficient service, it starts bleeding into the way that everyone plays the game, whether they want to or not. And that's part of the problem. Is in a massively multiplayer environment, the economy affects everyone, right? And so it becomes like the way you suddenly have to play. And for some people, absolutely, it's going to be fine because you have less time to deal with the inefficiencies, so you have less fun with them. But at the same time, like if it was totally efficient and someone could just go, hey, I'll just go beat the end boss for you, like just stand next to me and get all the XP, that would probably be too far, right? You wouldn't get anything to enjoy at that point. So like, yeah, there's a gray area for sure, like depending on your level of time and stuff like that. But you do have to worry about everyone in the environment being overly skewed. And to the Diablo 3 auction house point, part of the problem with the Diablo 3 auction house wasn't just that it existed, it's that they designed the game around it and skewed a whole bunch of the drops to suck, so you kind of had to use the auction house. And they actually like once they took the auction house out, they adjusted all the drop rates and stuff and actually made the game more fun, and Diablo 3 became a better game because they redesigned it without the auction house. And that was the thing a lot of people ignore, is that it wasn't the same game before and after, essentially.
I think it almost, Jasper, you should also almost think about, RuneScape with an open economy as if you almost like remove the early game.
Yes, because that's why I start Oldschool RuneScape again. Because the raiding is
for me, yeah,
is why I rejoined RuneScape. I wanted to do raids with my friends and not really have the early game there.
Well, and I think that on average, like the late game will be less fun if there's no early game. If there's no I'm able to do these raids, and there's a ton of people who are trying to get here to do these raids. And because that's my case, and I know that actually your game that you were building was actually just the rating part, right?
I think,
but then yeah. So, but I mean, I get your point, and I'm
hey,
sure
Cuphead's all boss
exactly.
fights. That game
that's
does well.
that's one of the reasons why I looked into my game as well. It's just the end game is actually where most of the fun is, and gamers are getting older than they were before, I'd say, because a lot of us are getting older. Yeah, and we don't have that much time anymore. I recently read a Reddit thread where they were saying, okay, gaming is giving me less and less mental rewards. And I think if you were able to skip the early games in most of the games, I think gaming would become more and more fun again for the older generation, so to speak. I sound like a boomer, but
I think you're generalizing just like Nico, though. Like you're generalizing towards your point of view, and he's generalizing towards his, and like there's just a spectrum of players. Like period. Like people like different things. I think as much as we'd love to solve games, I don't think we can solve games with one type of game for every person. Right? At the end of the
absolutely,
day,
what you're saying about there being a whole different type of gamers, I think that's what makes my point stronger. I think because not everyone will be using the open economy. Some people will, some people won't. Some people will enjoy the early game, want to do the grinding and think like, okay, they might be thinking in numbers, okay, if I do this grind, it saves me like $5 and okay, sure, I'll do it. I think it's just the difference between the people that makes it work, in my opinion.
If you had different servers and it was only on certain servers that was the case, I think that would be the ideal solution at the end of the day.
Yeah, and for me, I think the fact that you can use it makes the game less fun. The fact that you can like press a button, pay $10, and get to the end game makes the early game less fun. And I agree that there's different player types, and I would agree that perhaps in different servers that could cater to different player types, we might have this different discussion, right? But I'm thinking in a global MMO where part of your fun also depends on how hard it is.
No, but I think you're just a super competitive player, and for you the fun is being compared to others. For me, it's like the intrinsic value of doing the raids and completing the raid and whatever I get, but it's the fun I have with my friends and not necessarily, okay, I can show to the rest of the world that I did this and I put in all the time and stuff. And that's where we differ. And I think that's also where our disagreement stems from, that we're just two different players.
Yeah, could very well be. That's true. So I guess to make your point, Jasper, you quit Fudium next week, and you continue building your game. So we can see how successful it is. Because
But one thing that I
Jasper
did want to bring up as well is what really makes me believe in why those economies could work is that actually creating items and getting items is totally free. You start the game with nothing. It's a free-to-play game, and everything that you earn, that's created, that's, let's say, minted, is minted for free. There's no cost to pay, and that's where a lot of games currently, I think, are really missing the mark. As in RuneScape, you just build up your own NFT portfolio, let's say, and it's done truly in a free way, and that's where I think a lot of the games should be gravitating towards. No. Instead of having pre-sales and stuff like that, that every NFT in the game, at least the ones that have like some game impact, should be earned by the players themselves and should never be sold by the company directly.
Well, that would just be getting into what we were originally talking about, which is allowing NFTing of items in the game and stuff like that. So that just goes to that same style.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, I guess that's what we were saying is that, if there's like a pre-sale of X amount of NFTs that have like an unfair advantage within the game.
True.
Yeah, we don't want to drag back to last week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good. I mean, this was a good discussion, like a good meaty part of this recording. I guess to conclude it, I mean, I guess Jasper and I, we agree to disagree, and we'll see, right? I'm like, maybe in a few years, one of the games, like we can say like this is close enough to like a game like RuneScape to actually prove your point, Jasper. And I still stand by my point. I actually like have a very negative view of humans, that they're like super greedy and they'll do anything to just maximize their profits, and that will actually result in whatever Devin discussed, which is if you can take away the obstacles in a game, we will do so because we're stupid, and that's actually ruining our gameplay experiences. Which is why like Iron Man accounts.
I think I would be the counter argument to that, Nico. I definitely am not that kind of player. Period. I could care less about getting greedy with stuff. So.
That's fair.
But I do think a big reason that the Web 2 and the Web 3 gaming divide is as big as it is that over the last year to year and a half, I think Nico's point about human greed and the way people operate has been proven true, and so. I think a big reason the connotation of Web3 gaming is scams and greed and all these bad negative things is we have a lot of examples of that over the last year and a half. And I mean, there's been a lot of value extraction. There's been a lot of questionable decisions made in the interest of pumping your own bag. And so I do think Nico's thesis has been proven out in a short amount of time. I tend to agree with him, but I think that's been a big problem for bridging the gap between these two very contentious sides of gaming.
Yeah. And I mean, to add on that, like last year, Jasper, I thought exactly the same as you. And
it's funny because when we started talking about crypto, you were a totally different guy, and because I've been listening to all your podcasts that you've done, I really have been noticing your change in how you approach things as well. It's really interesting. If anyone wants to dig deep into Nico's brain, just listen to all his podcasts and you'll see him evolving as well.
He's leveling up.
Now I'm like,
you've just been grinding too hard, Nico.
Well, I think Nico, like same thing as I've seen over the last year is I've seen so many reskins of games where the game is exactly the same, but now the advertisement is you can earn by playing it and you can sell your assets. But like the game itself is like, oh, it's another tower defense game that looks like Clash Royale. Oh, it's another MMO that looks like X, Y, and Z. And I do think you get jaded where the gameplay isn't necessarily changing that much, and the core appeal of it is the earning component. And I think we always try to come up with new and interesting ways to use Web3 in games to really make them more compelling experiences. But I mean, a lot of
the fact that there was
the end goal. It's just
the fact that there was a Flappy Bird that had crypto in there. I mean, that was just insane.
Oh God, fancy birds. Yeah. I'm on the consultant side though, so like I'm the opposite of the jadedness, because you guys are on the side of like whether I give money or not to this, right? Whereas I'm on the side of like actually being able to help fix things. So for me, like it comes to me like the same things you're talking about. Like they come to me and they're all like this copy and paste, an unoriginal idea or like an original idea that's you know like not really well thought out or whatever. But because I'm in a position to try and help fix that, I actually am the opposite of jaded about it. I'm excited about the possibilities to make it better, right? And so like I think that also like factors in a little bit in that like I'm not in as tough of a position of having to just get slammed with that stuff daily and just being like facepalm every day, because I facepalm and then I go, okay, well that'll be this many hours then to fix that for you, and it's okay, like then so like it's different kind of motivation incentives. But I mean, like it's good to have people from all the perspectives, right? Like as long as you guys don't get too jaded that you leave Web3, like definitely stick around, because there's a lot of cool stuff that can happen. And mobile at first, honestly, was pretty bad too, and it's still kind of bad in some ways. And you know, you see the copy paste. Hey, guess what? I'm making a merge game. Oh, really? You're making a merge game? No one's done that before. Like, you know, it happens to all of it, right? Any industry that gets big enough, you gotta see it coming.
And one thing I will say on that is it's not just that any game that's using Web3 to try to make even marginal improvements to existing games within that genre. Like marginal improvements in Web3 right now can be powerful, right? Like we can't expect Web3 to fix all of these problems or make these massive leaps at the current timeline that we're in. So we do see genres that are being iterated on, and maybe it is marginal improvement today that can compound into something really meaningful over the coming decades. But it's not to say that, you know, you make a tower defense game, there's nothing new about it. But I mean, we've definitely seen plenty of instances of, hey, it's a tower defense game where you can earn, and that's the iteration. And
the massive leaps that you're talking about, but this can maybe be another discussion, is what currently is triggering me, that we're trying to force too many changes on the new wave of players. Where I feel like, okay, if we were to like gradually introduce players to the whole advantage of blockchain, I think that would work better. Because in the beginning, if we currently look at free-to-play, currently you have like these battle passes, these loot boxes and stuff like that. In the beginning it was just like this is a game. If you just want some different clothes, you can just pay us, okay? It's fine. And that's how free-to-play started gaining traction. And if we would have started free-to-play with this whole battle pass and loot boxes thing, I think it would have had even more backlash and might have not survived until now.
I think gamers are just change averse generally, and I don't think it matters how aggressively you do it. Obviously, yeah, you can get bigger backlash and stuff like that, but I don't think that's gonna at the end like really have a big enough difference. Like you're always gonna have that painful growing period at the beginning where everything's rejected. Like, but at the same time, you know, gamers are always rejecting business models. Like as soon as money's involved in games, like gamers just are rejecting, whether it be a publisher dictating what's in a game, like in the old school, you know, retail box model, or DLC or expansion packs. Like those, you know, those things slowly get accepted over time, but people rejected all those things at first. Anything that involves money, it's just like, you know, it just scares gamers. And it's like to the point where I'm almost wondering if like the game business is going to fall apart outside of free to play, because like no one is willing to pay for anything anymore. People are just like freaked out. Like everyone wants to be free to play without ever buying anything, period. And then wants the game to magically survive. And like, it's just very unrealistic. And gamers, like, I hate to use the word entitled, but the behavior very often leans very heavily that way, in a way that like makes me like not want to say I'm a gamer sometimes, just because it's kind of very bratty behavior. And like they don't understand. Like I would love to see more gamers make a game before they could. And I'm not saying you have to be able to criticize it, but I'm saying like I think you would get a valuable perspective from doing so.
Fascinating conversation. I feel like next week we can maybe talk about, like, I've been thinking about what is the best monetization model for a game. For me, that's like let's not go into it. I mean, it's going to take us way too far. But I've really enjoyed this part. Should we do some news, or
this is the news?
Keep on jamming and debating. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating discussion, as you can probably tell. Good. Then, Minecraft says no to NFTs. Who wants to? I barely read about it.
I mean, Nico, I think you pretty much just gave that news. Minecraft basically said no to NFTs. The reason was interesting. They said it was because it was too exclusionary due to the scarcity of NFTs, and I just think there's some big assumptions in the logic there, where NFTs don't have to be inherently exclusionary, right? I mean, you can maybe say that they are. They're finite, right? So not everyone's going to have the same.
They
exact
don't have
thing
to be finite.
Every NFT is going to have its own ID. Yeah,
you could say diamond pickaxes are too exclusionary in
as
Minecraft because like you have to work to get them, and not everyone has one. Like it's not really a valid argument in my opinion, because that's a very like one way of looking at NFTs. That's it.
Yeah, and I think really, if everyone did free mints on Minecraft and every NFT was a free mint, is that exclusionary? Like, no, probably not. And so I think it almost felt more like a PR thing, and they said they'd keep the door open to see if the space evolves and it becomes more trustworthy and it really adds value, and we go away from the speculative mindset that pervades all of NFT gaming or blockchain.
There's
gaming.
one thing to blame: selling land.
They kept the door
That's
open.
really what it comes down to. They specifically mentioned land, and that, in my opinion, that's what did it. Like NFT Worlds, all these other ones, like selling land, that's where you're stepping over the line, in my opinion. And I'm against selling land in general, so like I'm maybe a little biased there, but I think that's what triggered it, in my opinion. If it was just items and they were like exclusive to certain mod servers and stuff, like who cares? But it's selling land and selling access that I think triggered them into feeling like, hey, you're locking players out from playing, or from being able to participate in the creative aspects.
Yeah, and that is definitely a fair point towards the exclusionary aspect, but I think it's one narrow use case, and they're going a little bit further than that. I think that use case warrants within their ecosystem, but who knows? Maybe they'll reverse this at some point down the road. But for now, no NFTs on Minecraft.
Yeah,
feels like they're saying not necessarily no to NFTs, but no to the way NFTs are used right now.
Yes, and I think the last year is, to our prior discussion, the last year has validated a lot of their concerns, and so I think that's fair on their front. But one thing that was really interesting is the GamesBeat article that talked about this pointed out that it's interesting how all of these studios have to come out and say, no, you can't use NFTs, instead of just having the standard be, unless we say we're going Web3, we're not. But everyone has to come out and make it a very clear point of, no, we aren't Web3, or yes, we are Web3. There's no default. The default is apparently we're considering Web3, and you have to come out
saying non-NFTs almost feels like woke virtue signaling kind of thing, where you're like trying to pick a side and like pull up your flag with that, that side. Hey, I'm with you guys that hate NFTs. Like it's almost like trying to spin a PR in another direction, like signaling in some way to people that are like the true gamers. Oh, you true gamers stick with Minecraft here because we're against NFTs. Like, I mean, I don't think they're going that far, but that Sony one about the collectibles, their Stars program, that one felt a little bit more like that pseudo virtue signaling sort of thing. The way they like, we're definitely not NFTs like 3 times in there. Like, that's where like maybe Minecraft will reverse things on this. It does feel like they probably will kind of commit to this for a while, at least. But the nice thing, I guess, is at least the NFT Worlds and Gridcraft and stuff didn't super overreact. Like they're looking to like try and negotiate it a little bit, like see if they can work with Mojang to kind of figure it out. I doubt they'll be able to, but at least like they're not totally freaking out about it. But they are kind of the culprits behind the land stuff. So
it's like 6 months ago, all of these companies said, yeah, we're exploring NFTs just to appease investors. And now that things have shifted, it's like, no, we're not doing NFTs. We're staying away. Screw those. Again, to appease investors, because investors now don't like it anymore. Yeah.
Financial virtue signaling.
Too bad, but exactly. All right, then we had an Otherside test. So Otherside is the what is it, like the Bored Ape ecosystem metaverse, working with Improbable. Who knows most about that?
I guess I don't know. I definitely do.
Okay, Devin, go.
It was pretty interesting because they actually they didn't just the first thing they ran was like just a blank test where it was just like, can everyone log in and sit here for 30 minutes and talk, and that worked. Okay, cool. But the next time, like they actually had like some sort of gameplay, And like I thought that was impressive that they actually didn't just be like, you can run around in a bigger space with more textures. It was like they threw in some sort of like experiences. And I think if you're trying to sell us on the idea of a metaverse with so many shallow, bad metaverses out there, like actually showing that you're trying to do something, that was already kind of a step above of what most people are doing. Now, I don't think they necessarily are for sure going to make like the next great thing ever, but I thought that was a better showing than we're seeing from most of these metaverses. Like even, like Sandbox or Decentraland sometimes can feel really hollow with all of these people building all of these quote unquote experiences. And yeah, maybe you could do more than you could do in the Otherside one, but they also dropped the light paper right after and detailed a whole bunch of. Well, I say detailed, it wasn't super detailed, but like if you read between the lines, you could get an idea of where things were going. And I thought that gave some confidence, and I could see why ApeCoin did well after that, because people could see like, okay, they're actually trying to build something and not just trying to pre-sell.
I did not read the light paper, but I did see a live stream of someone exploring the demo, and it was really impressive. I think it was like 4,500 players in one server. Everything was running in the browser. Everything was running super smooth. Everyone was talking, and it was really impressive to see it. It's really a Web3 game, so the web is finally coming to its fruition. But I would have never paid that much money for that game. But the fact that they're really at least trying to pull it off is kind of confidence giving in the global space.
And to give some context on the technical feeds, because I had the same feeling. I was like, oh, this looks better than I had expected from the Bored Ape Yacht Club. They're working with Improbable, who's been working on that for like 10 years already. And so like it's tech that has been working, and so apparently like there wasn't much NFT integration, literally just like, do you own an ape or something, and then you can run around. Anyway, so that's just like to caveat the technical. It's not that a bunch of like ape founders actually built this shit.
But I think a lot of people also doubted Improbable. So like that was good to see like that their tech actually worked, because I think a lot of people were like skeptical of what they're doing. So like maybe it actually proved Improbable more than it did Yuga Labs, right, in terms of like delivering. Also, the part that you mentioned about, and Jasper, about running in the browser, I think is a cool aspect, because when we talk about metaverses, one of the things that's I think going to be problematic is whether or not you can play on your phone too, because a lot of people aren't going to sit in the metaverse on their computer all day, right? But people have phones with them everywhere they go. The ability to like jump in from either or and using cloud tech, I think that's a smart move, like that they're taking advantage of Improbable's cloud browser-based stuff. And I think more metaverses should really consider that approach, or at least really making sure that they have solid mobile and desktop clients, and maybe console down the road as well, to make sure it's like really for people to feel really sticky to the environment, like they're always there in some way to pull them in the way social networks can pull people in. I think that's an important thing that maybe is getting overlooked with a lot of these quote-unquote metaverses.
Yeah, 100%. It made me think of the interview that Aaron from Navic did with Raf Koster, who is the creator of Ultima Online. So that is something that you should listen to if you're listening to this.
Raf's the man. People need to listen to him.
I mean, he's way smarter than we are. Yeah, 100%. So Raf Koster interview on the Navic, Navic podcast, Metacast by Navic it's called. It was great stuff. I actually haven't even finished it. I'm halfway. I'm like, oh, this is good. Okay, then maybe last thing. Square Enix says yes to NFTs, as opposed to Minecraft. Phil, you want to intro that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Nico, to your point of, there's been a lot of groups that have come out and said, hey, we're really interested in exploring. I think Square Enix has been one of the groups that has just continued to dive a little bit deeper. And, they're not full-blown, we're integrating NFTs in our game yet, but they're starting to genuinely explore beyond just saying they're going to do it. So what they did is they're doing a 25th anniversary Final Fantasy VII physical collectible release. And for, I think like a $20 premium, something relatively small, you also get a digital code for an NFT that accompanies your physical collectible. So while it's not really a huge gaming update, I do think it's interesting that they're using such a prominent IP of theirs. And granted, it's not an IP that's really in circulation from a player perspective today, but they are still putting one of their most prominent IPs on the chopping block for a kind of the wolves to chew away at. So I think that was promising. We've talked in past episodes about how we thought a lot of these publishers might protect their core IP, even if it's from the past. And so I do think it's interesting to see them put Final Fantasy VII right up front and center with this NFT release. So basically, to your point, the opposite of Minecraft's approach today, really diving in, and I'm curious to see what
it currently has no
Square Enix
utility,
actually
right?
goes on the true gaming side.
I think, yeah. I don't think so, yeah. I think it's more collectible.
Not that I'm aware of. I think it's a true, ownership verification digitally for your physical collectible.
I think people with strong IPs.
So all the NFT haters can scream, look,
Yeah.
it doesn't have any utility, it's not worth anything, look, it's just a receipt.
Yeah. The best part, actually, I was reading an article on this, and they talked about the irony of how Final Fantasy VII's lore is all about how this big corporation is trying to drain the world of its natural resources. And you know how some of the gaming publications
no,
get,
not the
it's
environmental.
It's so ironic. It's so ironic. I know Devin loves this. But it's so ironic that they're killing the environment while paying like an homage to this great IP of theirs. And they mentioned how they're using engine, and it's an eco-friendly piece of infrastructure, but that there was this big call out on irony that I think is very much so overblown, but it was funny nonetheless.
That's a trigger for me, I think, is the environmental argument at this point.
Yeah.
But I do like seeing like people's strong IPs are the ones who really should be looking at the space, like, because it is such like, I mean, obviously there's the trickiness of IP handling in terms of like ownership and stuff like that, but in general, like, if collectability is a important thing in NFTs, then like strong IPs benefit the most. And I think it actually ties nicely into the Disney accelerator program, like the other thing I was going to mention, because especially if they want to do Kingdom Hearts, right? The Square Enix Disney game, like, then they can really do that kind of crossover. But this idea of like Disney especially, I mean, I hate to put it like this, but they can be kind of sluts with their IP, especially Marvel stuff. And that was before Disney as well. Like, Marvel's pretty, they're all over the place. Like, they're just like, hey, you want Marvel IP? Cool. Like, they're handing out street corners and trench coats. Like, but I think, like, obviously that is something that they do, right? Like, that's what Disney does, right? They build IP and then they start pumping it out everywhere like it's a t-shirt cannon. Like, just, this is where the IP goes everywhere. And I think NFTs, like, are a good fit for them. Like, they can really do lots of different things. Like, the way there's, like, a ton of Marvel games or a ton of Disney games. That Disney Mirrorverse game just came out even. And that's, like, the millionth one of those, like, collect the different characters from the different Disney stuff and battle them kind of games. It's not even, like, remotely the first one. And I think they obviously are keen to do stuff like that on the blockchain. We'll see what they actually do, but I think these IP-heavy companies should take advantage of this. Like we were talking about a while back, the Mattel toys trying to do stuff in their space. And it's like, maybe it's early, maybe they're going to get in and like stumble around a lot, maybe they'll make mistakes, maybe they'll get some backlash. But I think if you want to be like a strong IP, you need to be able to move into these spaces and make your mark and like continue to establish yourself with the next generation of people that are into this tech. Because if you start to fall behind and just stay like, oh no, we're just gonna just make dolls or whatever, like, and stick with that, like you're gonna age out at some point. Like, Disney likes to stay relevant to the kids. That's why they like to remake their movies and stuff like that. And so it's just smart. And Square Enix, yeah, maybe like you said, Final Fantasy VII's pretty old and it's a bit of a nostalgia play, but they did do that remake recently and stuff like that. So like they try and bring it back in, and it's mostly just because most of the other Final Fantasies weren't any good afterwards. The MMO is doing quite well though, from my understanding. But it's one of those things that, like, I'm glad to see Square Enix doing it, and I don't think everyone should do it. But if you have strong IP and it's not Ghost Recon, then go for it.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it, right? We're done. We've been over an hour now, so listener, if you're still listening, respect. This was a hefty episode with a little bit of news, a lot of discussing and debating, so I enjoyed it. Cool. All right, that's it. Devin, Phil, Jasper, thanks.
My pleasure.
For doing this with us. Jasper, welcome again. It was great having you. Good insights. And then, listener, if you have any thoughts on our discussion, please feel free to share. You can either do it on the YouTube video, or you can join the Discord if you haven't already, and let us know your thoughts there as well. Yeah, that's it. If you want to join the FOGDAO, find us at futureofgaming.wtf.